tale, so this was a good challenge for me. So here is my take on The Princess and the Frog, which also I love that story as well. Mine is called The Tree Sprite, though. So here we go. The sky was dark. There was no moon out tonight. The air was moist with fog as she quickly but light-footedly stepped her way through the marsh, every once in a while pausing to listen for the sound of hoofbeats behind her. Her long dark tresses had fallen from their pins ages ago and were now flying wildly behind her. She knew these marshes better than anyone else in the county, and if she could just make it to the comfort oak tree, she knew she could evade her pursuer. Ever since her father had suddenly and mysteriously passed away 6 months ago and left his estate to her, every old, crotchety landowner in the county was after her hand in marriage. A woman in 1642 could not own a property. She must wed to be able to keep it. But she would rather die than be tied to an old man for life. A few more bobs and weaves, and she could hide in the shelter of the roots of the comfort oak until he gave up. Her long skirt was now heavy with mud, and her kid leather boots were a mess, but she was safe in the folds of the roots of the huge oak that had been on her family's estate for hundreds of years. She sat down and tried to make herself even smaller than her already 5-foot frame. Her head in her lap, she closed her eyes and she listened. She could hear the hoofbeats in the distance and was still too nervous to leave the protection she had in her hiding place. As time passed, the ground was getting harder to sit on. She was getting cold and wanted to be able to go back home and sit by the heat of the fire in her father's study. Under her breath, she was cursing the name of John Catterall, the man who had literally been chasing her through the marsh. He owned the adjoining estate and was desperately wanted this one to increase his wealth. All of a sudden, Sarah sensed something in the air had changed. A gentle warmth, an odd feeling of calmness overtook her, and behind her closed eyelids, she saw a very bright light. She opened her eyes to see a golden pinprick of light that was floating in the air in front of her, kind of like a firefly, but much brighter. Eyes wide open now, Sarah stayed perfectly still, watching the golden little orb of light bounce to and fro. A whisper on the wind then carried her name, Sarah, Sarah. All of her senses now on heightened alert, she started to strain to listen. Surely it must be her imagination. Or was it the tree fairies? As soon as she thought it, and before her eyes, materialized the ugliest looking garden sprite that she could ever imagine. He had a bald head and huge pointy ears, hooded dark eyes, and he was less than a foot tall, probably about 2 feet around. He was naked, except for the dirt that he was covered in and some well-placed green moss. He smelled like the worst parts of the marsh that she had just run through. Horrified, Sarah backed up closer to the trunk of the tree and covered her nose and her mouth. The deepness in his voice startled her when he spoke. "Sarah Smith, I do believe," he said as he bowed a little. "The ancient tree fairies of the comfort maple have sent me to you. I've been granted the ability to help you out of your current, situation with your family estate." Sarah was blinking quickly, trying to figure out if this was really happening or if she had fallen asleep and was dreaming. Opening her dry mouth, she stiffened her back and answered, "I don't know who you are or where you came from or how you would think you could help me, but I don't need anybody's help, least of not from an ugly tree sprite. What I really need is to find a way to keep my family's estate from being pillaged and plundered by my greedy suitors." The sprite lifted a bushy eyebrow and said, "Let me think on it for a moment." And a moment passed, and a great, big, ugly, toothless smile opened on his face. Raising a dirty finger up, he said, "Eureka! I've got it. You need a male protector with whom to share and run this estate. I can be that. I know how to run an estate. I am financially astute. I can be your savior." Sarah's face screwed up and she looked indignantly at the ugly little sprite. She was starting to wonder if John Catterall's offer was better than having an ugly, smelly little wood sprite underfoot. I thank you for your offer, but I need a real man to present to the courts to stay them, and you definitely won't do. The sprite dropped his head into his greasy chest and let out a big sigh. Do you believe in fairies and tree sprites now that you've met one? Yes, she replied. Do you believe that they are old and wise and want to keep this estate in good health so they can stay here? He asked. Yes, that makes sense, she answered. I've been living on this one for the past 200 years, he said. He leaned forward and he said, kiss me. All your problems will be solved at the touch of our lips. Of course, Sarah did not want to, but she was so desperate for help and looking for some magic to help her situation that she leaned forward and placed a kiss on his smelly, filthy lips. There was a bit of smoke and an odd tinkling sound, and she reopened her eyes. The ugly sprite was there, grinning at her. Did you really think a small kiss would turn me into a princess or something? He laughed. Try again, but this time give me some tongue. Sarah leaned forward and plugged her nose, and her soft pink lips pushed against the greasy fat ones of the sprite. Her tongue entered his mouth, and just as she started to taste the filth, the ground shook beneath her. Her body trembled and she felt very odd, like she was fainting. And when she awoke, all she could smell was the damp earth. She looked down and realized she had shrunken to a foot tall. She was naked and her clothes were all pulled around her. All she could hear was the laughter and knee slapping of the tree sprite, and his parting words as he ran away, saying never trust or kiss a tree sprite once, or let alone twice. Ah, welcome to the tree sprite family of the Comfort Oaks, Sarah, he laughed as he ran away. The end. Don't be kissing strangers.